Number 15. The Geezer Bandit. Melissa Teixeira had seen plenty of customers in her time as a bank teller, but none like the man who walked into the Heritage Oaks Bank that day. He moved slowly. To the untrained eye, he looked like just another elderly man, but something was off. He approached the counter with a leather case clutched in a wrinkled hand. At first, Melissa thought he might need assistance, but that thought fled the moment he produced a handgun. Calmly, he handed a note to the teller beside her. "Give me $50,000 or I will murder you." The other teller froze, wide-eyed, her hands moving slowly toward the cash drawer. Melissa wanted to press the alarm button beneath the counter, but the gun made her hesitate. She could see the desperation in her colleague's eyes. Any sudden movement might make things worse. The old man, or rather this man who appeared old, wasn't in a hurry. His movements were deliberate and rehearsed. He demanded the money from both drawers, warning them not to include any die packs. "I'll come back for you if you do," he threatened. Melissa emptied her drawer. As the robber stuffed the money into his bag, she noticed something strange. His face didn't look right. It looked too smooth, too artificial. Then she saw it. A tiny hole in the center of his ear. It wasn't flesh at all. It was a mask. This was no old man after all. It was someone pretending to be one. And with that realization came a wave of fear. This person was far more dangerous than they appeared. After what felt like an eternity, the man grabbed his bag and left the bank, walking slowly at first, then picking up his pace into a run. As soon as he was gone, Melissa slammed her hand on the alarm. The bank was in chaos, but all she could think about was that mask. The FBI descended quickly, scouring the footage from the security cameras. They watched as the supposed geezer exited the bank, sprinting faster than any elderly man could. The mask theory was all but confirmed, but despite their best efforts, the trail grew cold. Weeks later, another robbery struck. This time, the geezer wasn't as lucky. A red die pack hidden in the money exploded, and the geezer bandit bolted, the stolen bills ruined. Surveillance cameras once again captured his quick escape, further proof that he wasn't who he appeared to be. Melissa couldn't shake the image of that masked face, and memories of a strange young man who had loitered in the bank weeks before. She reported him, but nothing came of it. As the robbery stopped after December 2011, the geezer bandit was never to be seen again. And though he's believed to be responsible for 16 bank robberies, his identity remains masked. Number 14. Sugar the Racehorse. The knock at the door came without warning. Jim Fitzgerald, head groom of the Irish racehorse Sugar, opened it to find two men in balaclavas, faces hidden, guns not. The words they spoke were even more chilling. "We've come for Sugar. We want $3 million. In that moment, Fitzgerald knew the night would end in terror. His heart raced as they led him at gunpoint to Sugar's stable. He tried to reason, but fear overtook him as 6 more armed men joined them. Sugar, the world-famous racehorse, was calm as they loaded him into the horse box, unaware of the danger ahead of him. It was February 8th, 1983, and the most valuable racehorse in the world was about to vanish into thin air. Fitzgerald was shoved into the kidnapper's car. As they sped away, his mind raced faster than Sugar, imagining all the horrors that could befall him, or worse, the horse. One man waved a revolver, muttering threats. They drove for hours, winding through dark roads, before finally tossing him out of the car. Fitzgerald managed to find a phone and called his brother. The call set off a frantic chain reaction, but there was one glaringly missed link in the chain. No one contacted the authorities until hours later. By then, it was too late. The kidnappers and Shergar had disappeared into the night. The story of Shergar's kidnapping made headlines. Valued at over $15 million, the Bay Colt was more than just a prize. He was a legend. Winner of the 1981 Epsom Derby by an astounding 10 lengths, Shergar was adored not just for his speed, but for his gentle nature. His owners had high hopes for his future as a breeding stallion, but those hopes were now dashed. Soon, a coded message arrived, a ransom demand. The kidnappers called, but there would be no ransom paid. Fear spread amongst the racing community that if they gave in, no racehorse in the world would be safe. The stakes were too high. Negotiations fell apart, with each phone call cutting off just before authorities could trace them. As days passed, the search for Shergar became a media frenzy. Reporters hounded anyone connected to the horse. Though a negotiator was sent to Belfast, the kidnappers wouldn't budge. The next day, a final call came. The horse has had an accident. He's dead. There was no more hope. The kidnappers claimed that Shergar became frenzied and uncontrollable, so they shot him. The horse's body was never found. Later, a member of the IRA claimed responsibility for the kidnapping after turning informant, but the organization as a whole denied involvement. To this day, the beloved Shergar's tragic end remains one of Ireland's most mysterious crimes. The horse's body has never been found. Number 13. Mail Truck Heist. In August of 1962, Route 3 in Plymouth, Massachusetts saw an audacious crime unfold, one that would become infamously known as the Great Plymouth Mail Truck Robbery. Filled with $1.5 million in cash, an amount that would be worth approximately $15 million today. The U.S. mail truck was making its routine delivery from Cape Cod to the Federal Reserve Bank in Boston. The heist was to become a masterclass in audacity and precision. The perpetrators were two men dressed up like police officers. With the help of their submachine guns, they commandeered the truck with efficiency. The driver and his armed guard were soon overpowered and bound. The robbers stole the vehicle and vanished into a maze of New England roads. In the hours that followed, the truck was discovered in Randolph, Massachusetts, abandoned on the side of Route 128. Inside, the driver and guard were found tied up but unharmed. But the cash it had carried within was missing, and the trail was growing cold. The enormity of the heist ignited the FBI. Along with the United States Postal Inspection Service, the FBI launched an investigation that spanned across New England. Despite their efforts, no tangible leads resulted. The authorities offered a reward that would now be worth over $200,000 for any information leading to the recovery of the stolen funds or the arrest of those responsible. The Postmaster General added an additional reward of $50,000, but all that came of the incentive was allegations. Amid the media storm, many innocent individuals were thrust into the spotlight, their names blackened by baseless accusations. As the 5-year statute of limitations approached, the search intensified. The Postal Inspection Service and the Department of Justice cast a wide net, closely monitoring known criminals in Boston. Their desperate measures included a campaign of surveillance and harassment in an attempt to ferret out the elusive thieves. In a last-ditch effort to crack the case before the deadline, a federal grand jury indicted 5 individuals, 4 men and 1 woman. Yet, as the trial approached, one defendant mysteriously disappeared and was never seen again. The remaining suspects were eventually acquitted due to a lack of evidence. The stolen fortune of $1.5 million has gone up in smoke. Decades later, the money has never been recovered, and the identity of the masterminds is as uncertain as ever. That is, unless Vincent Fat Vinnie Teresa, a notorious Boston mobster, is to be believed. He cast a shadow of suspicion in his memoir, My Life in the Mafia, by suggesting the heist was masterminded by John Red Kelly, who allegedly received a hefty share of the laundered funds, 80 cents on the dollar to be precise. Despite this claim, the Plymouth mail robbery has never been solved. Number 12. Mysterious brain disease of unknown cause in Canada. People were falling ill with no warning. First, it was small things, memory lapses, muscle twitches, but soon the symptoms became impossible to ignore. They couldn't walk without stumbling. Some began to see things that weren't there, and worst of all, they had no idea why it was happening. By 2019, an alarming number of people in the Canadian province of New Brunswick were experiencing this mysterious neurological decline. A pattern of eerily similar symptoms were being seen in these patients, but no one knew what was causing it. Dr. Alier Marrero, a neurologist based in Moncton, was the first to notice something strange. He'd seen cases of neurological decline before, but this was different. His patients weren't just deteriorating, they were wasting away, their bodies betraying them in ways he couldn't explain. Memory problems, hallucinations, agonizing pain in their limbs. It was as though their minds were slowly unraveling, and their bodies followed suit. Desperate for answers, he reached out to the federal Creutzfeldt-Jakob Disease Surveillance System, CJDSS, suspecting something far worse than a typical degenerative disorder. The response from Ottawa was instantaneous. Whatever this was, it wasn't Creutzfeldt-Jakob disease. This was something new, something that no one had ever seen before. The CJDSS ruled out all known prion diseases. Months of investigation passed, and still, the disease spread, with more and more cases popping up across New Brunswick. By the end of 2020, over 24 new cases had been identified, each displaying the same disturbing progression of symptoms. Some believed it was a toxin, maybe something in the water. Others thought it could be the air, the food, or even a hidden environmental agent slowly poisoning the region. The federal and provincial health teams grew increasingly alarmed, working day and night to uncover the cause of these dire illnesses. They found nothing. By the spring of 2021, word had leaked to the media. Reports of a mysterious brain disease with no known cause began to dominate the headlines, prompting fear and confusion. Patients spoke out, describing a horror straight out of a sci-fi novel. Extreme fatigue, involuntary muscle jerks, hallucinations, and a profound, irreversible loss of memory. Families watched helplessly as their loved ones faded, first mentally, then physically, until they were no longer the people they once knew. The search for the cause became frantic. Environmental toxins were suspected, including beta-methylamino L-alanine, BMAA, a neurotoxin produced by blue-green algae. New Brunswick's waterways were tested, and concerns grew about contamination, but again, nothing definitive was found. The disease's relentless spread continued unabated, and patient numbers grew. Some died of their illnesses, but others reached a plateau where they remained, still impacted by the neurocognitive changes caused by the disease. Autopsies provided no answers. Every step forward seemed to lead to 2 steps back. The province now carries the weight of the dead, and those whose lives were permanently affected by the mystery illness. What is happening to its people? Why is no one safe? And why was there seemingly pushback from the Canadian government when doctors and patients tried to get support towards finding out more about the illness? The answer remains unknown still today. Number 11. Lost City of Rapta. Alan Sutton hovered over the waters off the coast of Tanzania in a helicopter, scanning the ocean below. A low tide revealed an unusual shape beneath the surface that stood out in the otherwise smooth seafloor. Intrigued, he snapped a photo and later magnified it on his computer. What he saw was a formation that didn't belong, a seemingly man-made structure long hidden by the ocean's depths. It wasn't until a series of dives was conducted that the magnitude of his discovery truly became clear. During one spring low tide, the water cleared enough to reveal the wide foundations of a sprawling ancient structure. Square and oblong blocks lined the perimeter, some scattered as if they had fallen from their original positions. Others remained eerily upright, leaning against the foundation, having weathered centuries of ocean currents. Sutton knew what he was looking at was more than just a random formation. The size and precision had to be man-made. But what could it be? He wasn't just looking at any ancient ruin. He suspected that this could be Rapta, the legendary sunken city that had thrived over 1,600 years ago. Rapta was Africa's first metropolis, a city of wealth and influence, and a bustling hub for trade in tortoiseshell and metal weapons. And then, one day, it disappeared from history, swallowed by time and the shifting sea. Word of his find quickly reached Professor Felix Chaumy, an esteemed archaeologist from Dar es Salaam University. When Chaumy arrived at the site, his excitement was palpable. The ruins were likely from the Roman period, possibly even older. Accounts by Claudius Ptolemy, the Greco-Egyptian geographer, described Rapta as a powerful trading port ruled by Arabian chieftains. Yet for centuries, no one had been able to definitively locate its ruins, until now. Sutton and Chaumy understood the enormity of what they might have uncovered. But for all the excitement, questions still loomed. Was this truly Rapta? They needed more evidence, artifacts, relics, something tangible to definitively connect the site to the ancient city. The ruins were impressive, but without this proof, the mystery of Rapta's fate remained unsolved. What became of the ancient city? The answers might lay just out of reach. Number 10. John Singer and the Lost Treasure of Padre Island. While you may be familiar with the name Singer due to Isaac Merritt Singer's sewing machine empire, his older brother John Singer also made a name for himself in some circles. John was known not for invention, but for adventure. In 1847, John, along with his wife Joanna and their children, ventured to the then untamed coast of Texas. He arrived in the wilds of Port Isabel. He saw promise in the coastal waters and established a shipping business, his prized possession, a three-masted schooner named the Alice Siddell. Yet fate was soon to intervene. Inexperienced as a sailor, John captained the schooner into treacherous waters. The storm that descended upon them was not a mild squall. The wind howled and waves rose, slamming into the hull as he teetered desperately toward the shoreline of Padre Island. But the ocean was unforgiving. The schooner crashed against the coast, splintering into kindling. Miraculously, John, his wife, children, and a hired hand survived the wreck. Stranded on the island, the Singers salvaged what they could from the wreckage. The family huddled under a makeshift tent of sails and began building a small shelter from driftwood. Rather than drown in their misfortune, they found themselves enjoying the isolation. When a rescue boat finally arrived, they made a surprising decision. They would stay. John constructed a small boat to complete regular journeys back to the mainland, purchasing cattle to sustain his growing family, while Joanna planted a garden. The Singers not only survived, but flourished, and within a few years, they acquired the Santa Cruz Ranch, an estate once owned by Padre Jose Nicolas Bali. There, they built a new home on the foundations of Bali's old house, calling it Las Cruces. Though their fortunes improved, an even greater fortune was being gossiped about. According to rumors, the family had stumbled upon ancient Spanish coins while combing the beaches of Padre Island. A treasure chest filled with silver and jewels, perhaps hidden long ago by an unknown pirate. John was said to have stored his newfound wealth in a large sand dune, nicknamed Money Hill. As the Civil War erupted in 1861, The Singer family was forced to flee. Their wealth was said to be buried beneath shifting sands. When they returned years later, the landscape had changed. A hurricane had ravaged the island, and with it, Money Hill had vanished. The treasure was gone, and despite multiple attempts to recover the hidden fortune, John Singer never found it. His homestead had been destroyed by Union soldiers, and the treasure he had so carefully concealed was now lost to the sand. By the time he died in 1877, penniless and defeated, the riches remained buried, their location on Padre Island unknown. Number 9. Stolen Skull of F.W. Murnau. For years, Olaf Eilfelt believed the Southwest Cemetery to be a place of quiet. As its caretaker, he had spent decades tending to its tombs, planting bulbs in the spring, trimming the grass in the summer, and sweeping leaves away in autumn. Eilfelt had often reflected on the idea that the stillness of the tombs would persist long after he was gone. That all changed one morning in July 2015. Eilfelt's routine walk through the cemetery began like any other, but as he passed by the grand stone crypts, something caught his eye. Untouched for decades, one of the largest crypts on the property was now damaged. The gate that was usually sealed tight now hung open. Alarmed, he rushed forward. The crypt in question belonged to F.W. Murnau, one of Germany's most celebrated silent filmmakers, known particularly for the legendary 1922 vampire classic Nosferatu, which paved the way for cult horror for decades to come. Inside, the coffin lay exposed, its lid pried open. As Eilfelt peered into the crypt, he saw that the skeletal remains of Murnau were visible, but something else was horribly wrong. Murnau's skull was missing. Murnau had not died in Germany, but far from home in California. It was 1931, and Murnau was at the height of his career, having established himself in Hollywood after fleeing the Weimar Republic. On a fateful day in March, just a week before the release of his film, Taboo, A Story of the South Seas, Murnau was traveling along the Pacific Coast Highway in a rented car. His valet was driving when a truck suddenly swerved into their lane. The valet tried to avoid the oncoming vehicle, but the car crashed, overturning and flinging its occupants onto the road. Though his valet survived the crash, Murnau suffered severe head injuries and died the next day. Though his Hollywood friends mourned him at a funeral in California, Murnau's body was shipped back to Germany for burial. The greatest filmmakers of his time attended the ceremony, as did some of the biggest names in Hollywood. After his burial in Germany, his grave became a pilgrimage site for fans of the macabre. But this particular violation of Murnau's tomb likely had nothing to do with adoring fans. Upon closer inspection, Eilfelt noticed something chilling. Traces of candle wax littered the ground near the crypt. Eilfelt was convinced it was something darker: Satanists. He was certain they had stolen Murnau's skull for a ritual conducted by candlelight. Despite an investigation, nearly 10 years later, Murnau's skull remains lost. Number 8. Norton Disney Dodecahedron Mystery. It was the end of summer 2023, when in the small village of Norton Disney in Lincolnshire, a discovery was made by amateur archaeologists. While carefully scraping the earth away, one of the diggers paused, his hand brushing against something metallic. A small object lay hidden in the dirt, caked in mud, but unmistakably out of the ordinary. Once fully unearthed, they discovered a Roman dodecahedron, a mysterious artifact with 12 flat, pentagonal faces, each punctuated by a hole. About 3 inches tall and weighing only 8 ounces, it was immediately apparent that this was no ordinary find. Word spread quickly throughout the village, and soon Richard Parker, secretary of the Norton Disney History and Archaeology Group, arrived on site. After confirming its significance, the object was taken to the local museum for further study. Dating back nearly 1,700 years, Roman dodecahedrons have long baffled scholars. A total of 33 had previously been discovered across Britain, but this was the first to be unearthed in the Midlands, and though small, it was one of the largest overall. Theories about their purpose ran the gamut. Were they used in rituals, as instruments of magic or fortune-telling? Or had they been tools, meant to measure or calculate something, their function long lost to time? Experts examined every detail, from the smooth copper alloy to the curious knobs protruding from the corners of the shape. Yet they could not put their finger on its use. There were no markings to suggest it had been used as a tool, and no inscriptions that might provide clues. The holes were each a different size, but with no apparent rhyme or reason. Some speculated that the dodecahedron had been used in games, while others proposed it had a religious significance. But there was no record of such objects in Roman texts. No mention of their use, their significance, or even their existence. Volunteers from the dig vowed to return, hoping to unearth more clues. They combed the site, but nothing more was found. Now housed in the Lincoln Museum, the dodecahedron's purpose remains a mystery. What was it made for? Your guess is as good as any. Number 7. The leukemia incident in the English village of Seascale. Seascale was a quiet village darkened by the shadow of its neighbor, the towering Sellafield nuclear power plant. Revealed in an ITV documentary, it was found that an unusually high number of childhood leukemia cases were reported there between 1955 and 1983. 7 children in the village were diagnosed, where statistically with that population, even one diagnosis would have been an outlier. Of course, the villagers immediately pointed fingers at the nuclear power plant just a few miles away. Seemed like common sense. Sellafield was the largest nuclear facility in Britain. The proximity of the plant to the cluster of cancer cases fueled speculation that radioactive discharges were seeping into the lives of the innocent. Parents of the children who had been diagnosed believed there was poison in the air, the water, the soil. Politicians demanded answers, but there was no provable link. Initial reports hinted that there might be a higher instance of leukemia diagnoses in children of fathers who worked at Sellafield. The theory was that men exposed to radiation at the plant passed something deadly onto their offspring, but science was not so sure. Study after study failed to definitively prove the link. Then, in 1994, a new study by Sir Richard Dahl, one of Britain's leading cancer epidemiologists, cast further doubt on the radiation theory. His findings suggested that the earlier study, which assumed radiation exposure among the fathers, was flawed. Dahl's team proposed a different, potentially more unsettling possibility. Perhaps the cancer cluster had nothing to do with radiation at all. Maybe the cause was a virus. As the evidence mounted, it began to seem plausible. The Sellafield plant was still standing and functional, and no new cases of childhood leukemia had been reported since the 1990s. Something had changed, but the plant had not. The theory of population mixing took hold. It's a rare but known phenomenon that when large numbers of people move into isolated rural areas, they bring with them new infections, and Seascale had experienced an influx of workers when Sellafield expanded. Had these newcomers unknowingly introduced a virus that triggered leukemia in the village's children? The idea seemed almost too strange to believe, yet history had shown it had happened time and again. During World War II, an increase in leukemia deaths was also noted in areas that saw a large influx of workers. Once so certain of Sellafield's guilt, the village now found itself grappling with a new question. If it wasn't radiation, was it a virus? The mystery remains officially unsolved. Number 6. Steller's sea ape. George Wilhelm Steller, a naturalist with a reputation as formidable as the Arctic cold, was on a mission to unravel the mysteries of the North Pacific. Led by Captain Vitus Bering, the Great Northern Expedition was meant to redefine Europe's knowledge of the region, and for Stellar, it was a chance to catalog new species. However, the icy seas and harsh conditions would test more than his scientific acumen. They would reveal something unsettling that would haunt him for the rest of his journey. The expedition had already endured a brutal overland trek and had battled the relentless elements at sea. Eager to make his mark, Stellar joined the crew of the St. Peter with high hopes. Yet his expectations quickly soured. Bering was an unyielding and distant captain who granted Stellar only a fleeting glimpse of the land, a mere 10 hours on shore while the ship was resupplied. During that brief respite, Stellar managed to document a range of new species, but his opportunity for further exploration was cut short as the crew fell victim to scurvy, and Bering remained confined to his cabin, barely able to command. It was in these dire straits, amidst the desperate hunger and the relentless cold, that Stellar recorded his most curious observation, what became known as the sea ape. According to his notes, this creature was about 6 feet long, with a head resembling that of a dog, ears pointed and erect, and whiskers hanging from its lips. Its body was covered in thick hair, which appeared red when wet. The description was both vivid and baffling. Stellar's sea ape became a subject of speculation among cryptozoologists, often dismissed as a misidentified otter or even Stellar's own sea cow. But the more one delves into Stellar's notes, the less the account seems to align with a known creature. The story of the sea ape took a darker turn after the expedition's shipwreck on Bering Island. The crew was once again ravaged by illness and starvation. They discovered the sea cow, a massive, prehistoric sea creature, which they consumed. The tragic end of the expedition saw Bering succumb to scurvy, and the other members of the crew struggling to survive the relentless cold. Stellar, meanwhile, was left to finish his account of their journey in isolation. Stellar's final years were marked by hardship. He spent an additional 2 years in the Arctic, studying the Kamchatka Peninsula before his recall to St. Petersburg. He died en route in 1746, his manuscripts and notes arriving at the Academy only after his death. Among them, the enigmatic sea ape persisted in popular lore, despite its absence from Stellar's official reports. One theory about the sea ape is that it might have actually been a veiled critique of Captain Bering himself. The description of the sea ape bears an uncanny resemblance to Bering's features, particularly the whiskers. The name Stellar chose, Simnia marina danica, or the Danish sea ape, further supports this speculation. There was only one Dane on board, Bering. With its trials and misfortunes, the Great Northern Expedition became more than a tale of exploration. It was one of personal animosities. Perhaps the sea ape was less a cryptid and more a symbol of Stellar's discontent at the man he blamed for his frustrations. Number 5. Sir Cecil Edward Denny and the Time Slip Incident. It was 1875 when Sir Cecil Edward Denny headed out on a routine journey in Alberta, Canada, along the Oldman River. An inspector with the Northwest Mounted Police, Denny intended to go fishing and deer hunting, but the expedition would take an unforeseen turn. Denny was well acquainted with the rugged Canadian landscape. Having arrived in Canada the year before, he had quickly risen through the ranks, becoming a key figure in the Northwest Mounted Police. Decades later, he wrote his memoirs, capturing an experience so extraordinary that it defied rational explanation, a phenomenon now termed a time slip. As Denny navigated the river, the skies darkened, foretelling an approaching storm. Undeterred, he pressed on until the storm unleashed its full force, battering the river with wind, rain, and hail. With visibility diminishing, his small boat struggled against the elements, and Denny made a decision to seek shelter. He hid beneath a cluster of trees along the riverbank, and that's when he heard distant sounds that seemed to come from a camp of Indigenous Canadians, a rhythmic beating of drums and the murmur of voices. He steered his boat towards the shore, hoping to find some form of assistance from the camp. Despite the angry weather, the sounds of the camp grew louder, guiding him through the trees. As he entered a clearing, he saw the camp spread out before him, an active scene with men, women, and children moving about, firelight illuminating their lodges. The sight struck him as peculiar. The Blackfeet, known to reside in the area, were averse to such weather, and yet the camp was active. A herd of horses grazed nearby. Intrigued, Denny prepared to approach the nearest lodge, when suddenly he was overwhelmed by a blinding flash of lightning, coupled with deafening thunder. He was thrown to the ground by the sheer force of the lightning strike that had split a nearby tree. When he managed to rise and glance back, the camp had vanished without a trace. In disbelief, Denny stood alone in the barren clearing. It was completely devoid of any trace of the camp he had seen moments before. He tried to reconcile the sudden disappearance with reality. Overcome by a profound sense of terror, he fled the scene, abandoning his gun in his haste. He ran towards the riverbank, struggling to make sense of it all. The 15-mile trek to the fort was grueling. Exhausted and soaked, Denny arrived around midnight, too drained to discuss his ordeal. The next morning, he recounted his experience to his fellow officers, only to be met with skepticism and laughter. Despite their dismissal, Denny remained convinced that what he had witnessed was not a simple figment of his imagination. Determined to find an explanation, he returned to the site with an Indian guide and a Blackfoot interpreter. They discovered only remnants of an old camp, long abandoned. An old fire ring and a few scattered stones were all that remained. The Indian guide told of a historical account of a massacre at the location, but there was no sign of the camp Denny had seen. In the late 19th century, such an encounter defied comprehension, leaving Denny's account unaccounted for. To this day, many still try to account for the mystery of his experience, with theories from time slips to quantum anomalies. Number 4. Cornell's McGraw Tower Pumpkin. At first, no one paid much attention to the pumpkin. It was just a speck high atop the campus tower, barely noticed by the students hurrying across the Cornell campus in 1997. Someone might glance up, shrug, and think little of it. But when word spread that the speck was a pumpkin, curiosity killed the cat. A 50-pound pumpkin, placed so precariously on the tower's peak, seemed odd. Slowly, the pumpkin's presence became the talk around town. What began as idle campus chatter soon escalated into a media firestorm. Local papers picked up the story, and soon enough, national outlets followed suit. The mystery captured the imagination of not just the students, but the town and beyond. News spread, and even parents began asking about it during their calls home. Reporters from the Today Show arrived to cover the spectacle, giving the pumpkin its 15 minutes of fame. Although there was much speculation as to how the pumpkin got there and why, no one seemed to have the answer. Who placed the pumpkin there and how they had managed it remained a mystery. Unfortunately, right as removal efforts were getting underway, the pumpkin tumbled off the tower to splatter onto the ground below. It had been perched atop the campus tower for 5 months. Then, years later, an email surfaced. The author claimed to know the truth behind the infamous prank. The message outlined details so precise that it seemed impossible to dismiss. 3 individuals were involved, led by someone known only as Kennedy. This wasn't the first time Kennedy had pulled such a stunt. He had a history of bold pranks. With the help of 2 friends, known as Regan and Nixon, they had concocted a daring plan. One night, under the cover of darkness, the trio climbed the tower armed with duct tape, wire cutters, and a rope. Kennedy had scoped out the tower's vulnerabilities, picking the perfect moment to strike. They broke through locks, scaled the inner beams, and hoisted the pumpkin to the rooftop using the rope, securing it in place. By the time dawn broke, the prank had been completed, and the campus would never be the same. For weeks, it captivated an entire community, spawning countless theories, but no answers, perhaps until now. Although these claims were never verified, a mischievous prankster seems the most likely culprit. Years on, the legendary prank was renewed in 2023, when the tower was again capped with a bright orange pumpkin crown, an homage to the anonymous forebears who placed the original gourd. Number 3. Ben Tyner disappearance. On January 26, 2019, Ben Tyner, a 32-year-old cowboy from Merritt, vanished without a trace in the remote hills of British Columbia. The mystery of his disappearance began with a lone, riderless horse found on a random logging road off Highway 97C, and it would soon evolve into one of the region's most perplexing cases. A reliable worker at the Nicola Ranch, Tyner had been searching for stray cattle in the wilderness when he seemingly vanished. The discovery of his fully saddled lone horse appeared like an omen. An immediate search was launched across the rugged terrain where Tyner had last been seen. The RCMP combed through the area, their efforts challenged by the harsh conditions and the sprawling landscape. Despite the intense search, there was no trace of Tyner. The RCMP suspended their efforts after a week, citing the relentless environment and the lack of leads. Tyner's family was left in agonizing uncertainty, their grief compounded by the growing worry that something sinister might have occurred. 2 years on, new evidence had emerged. The RCMP's Southeast District Major Crime Unit reported that they had uncovered information that led them to believe Tyner was the victim of a homicide. However, the details of their findings remained closely guarded, leaving the public in the dark. In a heart-wrenching video plea, Tyner's family in Wyoming reached out to the public. Richard Tyner, Ben's father, called his son a gentle giant who had traveled far and wide before settling in Merritt. He implored anyone with information to come forward. "The pain of not knowing what happened to Ben is unbearable," he said. "We need answers." The Tyner family offered a $15,000 reward for information leading to the recovery of Ben and the conviction of those responsible for his presumed death. Despite the reward and the mounting pressure on the authorities, the case remains unresolved. Any information regarding the Tyner's case can be directed to Merritt RCMP at 1-877-987-8477. Number 2. George J. Stein Mystery. In the heart of Ripon, Connecticut, a bank in town was the center of a local mystery. That mystery entered the national spotlight on February 15, 1989, when the bank was featured in episode 16 of NBC's Unsolved Mysteries. It all started in 1926, with an ordinary transaction that soon became extraordinary. A man named George J. Stein walked into the local bank and opened a savings account with a deposit of $120, a respectable sum for the era. In today's terms, this translates to an amount over $2,600. Yet Stein's actual identity was unknown. He left no social security number, no home address, and his name was absent from official records beyond his initial deposit. Even stranger, over the next few decades, Stein's accounts multiplied. Between 1936 and 1952, he opened numerous accounts across the Midwest, in Wisconsin, Indiana, Minnesota, Iowa, and Illinois, never returning to claim or withdraw the funds. Left untouched and accruing interest, by 1989, these accounts had amassed a staggering $130,000. Against the backdrop of America's Great Depression, a period marked by widespread economic despair, this mystery was even greater. How could Stein, if he was actually a real person, remained so financially grounded in the midst of a nationwide economic collapse. A breakthrough came when investigators traced one of Stein's deposits to Indianapolis. This time, the account included a real address linked to a manufacturer of hats and gloves. From this lead emerged a clue, a physical description of Stein that matched a traveling salesman named Ralph Barnett. Barnett's sales territory aligned perfectly with the locations where Stein's accounts had been opened. The theory soon took shape. Perhaps Stein, or Barnett, had met a tragic end during his travels. None of the accounts were ever accessed, suggesting an abrupt and final departure from life, or perhaps a deliberate evasion. Yet the tale took another twist when a researcher unearthed an unsettling connection. Stein had once used the name Ed Fay on a deposit envelope. Historical records revealed that an Ed Fay, a notorious figure, had been implicated in a major heist in October 1903. Fay and his gang had stolen over $15,000 in stamps and cash from a post office in Superior, Wisconsin. Arrested in 1904, Fay had up and vanished when he subsequently escaped from jail. The parallel between Fay's and Stein's ages suggested that they might have been the same person, with Stein using a new identity to elude capture and continue accessing his illicitly obtained funds. But as the investigation into Stein's financial legacy progressed, it became clear that unraveling the mystery would not be straightforward. To claim Stein's fortune, would-be heirs needed to prove their relation and authenticate their claims with matching handwriting samples. Despite several individuals coming forward, none could meet the stringent criteria to crack into the dormant accounts. The enigma of George J. Stein, or Ralph Barnett, or Ed Fay, remains an unresolved chapter in the history of Ripon and the other towns in which the mysterious character made a deposit. Stein's legacy and his fortune may forever be kept under lock and key. Number 1. Pennsylvania cereal box notes. Cryptic notes crept up across the grocery stores and state parks of Pennsylvania. No one knew where they came from or what they meant. The creepy messages were dubbed the Schuylkill Notes by internet sleuths, and they had law enforcement agencies on edge and residents scrambling for answers. The first report of this strange occurrence came when a hiker in Lebanon County's Swatora State Park stumbled upon a series of peculiar notes affixed to trees and rocks. 23-year-old Zachary Zimmerman was exploring the park when he found the first of the series. Filled with erratic spelling and fragmented thoughts, the note referred to secret societies, fictional conspiracies, and celebrities like Elon Musk and Bill Gates. It was the kind of message that might send a chill down anyone's spine. Meanwhile, Joe Miller from Sugarloaf Township had a note delivered right to his cereal bowl. He had just opened a box of Lucky Charms s'more cereal when he discovered a folded piece of paper nestled among the marshmallows and cereal he'd poured out. The note inside was similarly cryptic, and this was only the beginning. The phenomenon quickly captured the attention of the FBI, the Food and Drug Administration, FDA, and a flurry of internet investigators. According to reports, the notes had been found in various locations, from Walmart and Target to Goodwill and Dollar General. They were also turning up along trails and in state parks, including Bald Eagle State Park near State College. The messages were unsettling and strange, with references to international conflicts, hate groups, and incoherent rants baked into obscure theories. Though they acknowledged the situation, the FBI remained tight-lipped about the details of any potential investigation. A spokesperson for the agency stated that she could neither confirm nor deny the existence of an active probe into the Schuylkill notes. Meanwhile, the FDA issued a stern reminder that tampering with food products is a federal crime and urged anyone discovering such notes to report them immediately. The spread of these notes has been mapped by Reddit users, revealing their widespread presence from the eastern part of Pennsylvania to as far west as Johnstown. This suggested a deliberate attempt to create unease. So many notes have been reported that a subreddit has been created to keep track of them. The mystery of the Schuylkill notes remains unsolved. The notes' strange blend of questionable theories, infamous names, and seemingly intentional errors may indicate that it's all just a joke, someone suffering from mental illness, or it may be something else entirely.